Thank you, Dee. Today's participants for our service are being recorded live, but not from our facilities on Morris Bridge Road, but here in Tampa and from our various homes. I'm Russ Patterson, and I've been a Unitarian for 32 years and a member of this congregation since 2005. I'm here because I support a religious community that has no dogma, but helps each other in a search for a meaningful and better life. I've served on our board of trustees, several committees, and have been a member and helper with our buildings and grounds work days. And now I'm the first husband of our congregation. Today, thank you for attending our service. If you're a first-time visitor, I hope you hear something today that will bring you back again for more of our services. If you're a second, third, or even a fourth-time visitor, thank you for coming today. We hope that you will consider joining us soon as a member. If you're a member of our church, we say thank you, thank you, thank you for your continued support and participation during this pandemic. Your ongoing participation and financial support during the pandemic have helped keep morale up and have made it possible for us to pay our employees and keep the air and lights on and maintain our facilities. We open our service today with our traditional stone ritual. I'll place 3 stones. The first one is for a joy that you may have had this past week. The second stone represents a sorrow. And the third stone represents an opportunities for and your intentions for the coming week. We now light our traditional chalice with these words by William Schultz. We affirm that every one of us is held in creation's hand, a part of the interdependent cosmic web, and hence strangers need not be enemies, that no one is saved until we all are saved, where all means the whole of creation. We welcome Reverend Charles McKenzie as our minister today. I've known Charles for over 10 years and admire his work for social justice. While not an ordained UU minister, his writings show me that he is a universalist theologically. Reverend McKenzie is an ordained minister and now a full-time public school teacher in Manatee County. Experiencing hardship and an unstable background growing up, Reverend McKenzie developed a passion for helping the less fortunate, the underserved and exploited, and the neglected. He has been involved in the political landscape, promoting civil rights for minorities, women, farm workers, and the youth. He's also the Florida coordinator for Reverend Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition and the vice president for the Haitian American Foundation of Tampa Bay. His love for people has led him to do missionary work in South Africa and the Philippines, where he is elected to the Board of Missionary Outreach in the Philippines. We welcome you, Reverend McKenzie. Our first hymn this morning is Morning Has Come, number 1000, led by Dee Lynch.
The light of hope here shines. Good morning to each of you, and I want to thank Pat Benedict and the Universalist family in Tampa for inviting me to share with you this morning. I want to thank Russ Patterson for introducing whoever that was he was talking about. I'll, uh, I'll step in and claim a portion of that. It's very kind words. And once again, I want to express my gratitude to both Russ and his wife, Candy, who was so very, very kind to me at a time in my life when I needed that support. This morning, I want to share with you some things that I would like for you to just consider, just think about. Universalists embrace the idea that, well, to each his own. You find your own pathway to truth, and you consider. You don't impose or try to necessarily proselytize anybody in terms of what you believe, but you share with them, and then you let each individual decide what it is he or she would like to embrace. And so I come in that spirit today. And much like our founding fathers who created a constitution and tried to create a republic that reflected that framework of thinking, certainly the first six presidents leaned more toward universalism than perhaps those who succeeded them. But I'm grateful. And this morning, I want to talk about something that I find very powerful and interesting. And I'd like to begin by saying that I am a student of Neil Donald Walsh, who is the author of Conversations with God, Friendship with God, Communion with God. It's a New York Times bestseller, best-selling author rather, who's written extensively since the 1970s. And I found his works to be very much in line with what I embrace as truth. And I even felt that many of the ideas or concerns, thoughts and concerns I had about my own existence and my own experience were answered through his reading his writings. I'm just excited to be here today and to share with you these things. So the title this morning is in line with the overarching theme for this month, a new way of thinking, widening the circle of our awareness, because the theme is about widening the circle. And I want to start this by saying this message this morning by saying that the human species, the one species that we're a part of that we call human beings, in relative to the universe is a very young species. We're really toddlers when you look at the age of our universe. It's been estimated to be around 13 billion years old. And Homo sapiens, which is what we are today, modern humans, have been around for about 200,000 years. So we're very, very young species. And I think as a young species, we go through the evolutionary process and we do the kinds of things that toddlers do when they're new at the process of living. And I think a lot of what we see in our world is a reflection or is indicative of the fact that we're such a young species. I think also another indicator of the youthfulness of our existence is to feel that somehow in this vast universe that's billions of years old, that we're the only sentient beings around. I think there are things that are increasingly indicating to us that we might just not be the only sentient beings in this universe. But I wanted to start there because we are an evolving species. And I mean more in terms of what we might call spirituality than the physiological aspect. We have evolved physiologically. But I think that in a great sense, the physiological evolution has in a very real sense outpaced the spiritual evolution, our awareness and our connectivity to what is, in my view, the reality, the ultimate reality of this universe and this life that we live. I think Dr. King put it this way. He said that we've learned to swim the sea like fish and we've learned to fly the air like birds, but we haven't learned to walk together as sisters and brothers on earth. And I think he was trying to say to us that there's a lot we must do in order to bridge the gap that we're experiencing between each other, even in light of the massive technological advances which have leaped forward in the past 3 or 4 decades. Our technology is, in my view, outpacing us. And to relate to something that Dr. King said again, he said, with our technological and scientific genius, we've made of the world a neighborhood, and now through our moral and spiritual genius, we must make of it a brotherhood. So this very young species, has not learned to ultimately bridge that gap. And I think there are things that tell us that we have not evolved to the extent that we have come into the place where we embrace the ultimate reality of our existence. There's still a lot of lower consciousness that abounds. And the reason for this, I believe, is that we have evolved so slowly because of our cosmology, our pathology, our sociology, and theology of separation. We somehow believe that we are separate from one another, and we're separate from the universe. We're separate, and in view of that, we interact with each other, and we're acting out this separation between us. We're separate in terms of our beliefs about each other, to the extent that we can do some pretty atrocious things to each other. We still live in fear as a species. We still continue to try to do the things that don't work. We know that certain things are not healthy for us. We know that certain things create more havoc and more destruction, but we continue to do those things. And I think we do that because of this theology and pathology of separation. And I think if we even looked at what scientific inquiry is telling us, that everything in the universe is connected, and that it's all made of the same stuff, that we are more individuations of some single source of our existence. 90% of the people in the world believe that there is something larger than us out there. There's something that's bigger, that's responsible for our existence. And even those who say, well, it all just began with the Big Bang, they run into a kind of dead end when you ask the question, then what is the first source of that Big Bang? What is the first source? I have embraced some ideas that I think provide an explanation for that. And as I said, I just present them here this morning in light of the things that I have read and the things I've embraced from the writings of Neil Donald Walsh. And I'd like to pose the question that he poses to those who are introduced to his writings. He said, is it possible, just possible, that there are things about ourselves and about life and about the entity we call God that we do not understand, the understanding of which would change everything? And I think beginning at that place, and in view of what science is beginning to tell us about the interconnectivity, and I'll lean on Dr. King again. It is Black History Month, but I'll lean on him again when he says we're all tied together in a single garment of destiny, bound by an inescapable network of mutuality. And what affects one directly affects all indirectly. Strangely enough, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. But because we still ideologically view each other as separate from each other, and by the way, we embraced this pathology, this theology of separation from our primeval ancestors. We have embraced the first premise of that ancient world's theology. And most of us are afraid to even question it, because we view it as sacred, as something you don't touch, something you don't bother with. And those who have done that have been called heretics, and they've been called apostates, and people who have dabbled with things they shouldn't dabble with, because we've embraced the first premise. But we don't embrace the first premise in any other area. In science, we don't embrace the first premise. We test it, we challenge it, we question it. And I think it's because we've embraced this first premise because our ancient ancestors looked at the world around them. They looked at the environment. They looked at the physical things that were part of their experience and saw those things as separate. They did not even have some of the basic information we have today because of scientific inquiry that shows that everything is connected in some way and that there's a kind of energy that runs through all of it. And so they viewed these things as separate from them. And when certain phenomena would take place in the environment, the thunder and the lightning and other things, they concluded that there must be something responsible for that, but that something is over here while I'm over there. And I think because we've embraced that in our theology, in our pathology and cosmology, we've embraced something that does not reflect ultimate reality. And I think that there are evidences of our oneness all around us. My grandmother used to have a saying, and you probably heard it, if it had been a snake, it would have bit you. I think there are things that show us how things can be individuated and still not separated. If we look at the fingers on our hand, there are 5 fingers on one hand. They are individuated, but they're not separated. Look at the waves on the ocean. Those waves are unique, they're different, they rise and fall, but they're all a part of this vast ocean. And in a real sense, I believe that our first source has divided itself into a gazillion pieces. And it's not some amorphous being, some separate daddy in the sky that is responsible for this, but I believe it is the energy of life itself that is responsible for everything that does exist. And I believe not only that we are connected to one another, but we're connected to everything in the universe, even the other sentient beings in this universe, because I believe, I embrace this, that there's only one entity. There's only one entity, and that entity has divided and multiplied and individuated itself into these gazillion aspects. It's just one entity, which is responsible for all of this. And science tells us that there's a kind of energy that runs through everything in existence that's responsible for everything that exists. And it tells us that this energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And I believe that this entity, this single entity, that we've labeled God. Some of us call it Jehovah, others call it Allah, some of us call it nothingness. Whatever we choose to call it, it is what it is. But I think this is what I call the kicker. And this is where I may part in my belief from some others. I believe not only that there is one entity and that we're singularities of a singularity, but that force, if you would, is self-aware, is sentient. And I think that is why we are sentient, because as creations of this, and there are traces of this kind of thought in the writings of scriptures and other books across the centuries. I believe it is recorded that Jesus said, "Ye are all gods," that we are somehow, as in the book of Genesis, that records that oral transmission, ye are created in the likeness and image of this creator. And we've given this creator a kind of humanoid makeup and a separate kind of existence, when in fact, I'm convinced that it's life itself, that life and God and the first source are all the same thing, and that we are here for a very specific reason. I believe that we come from this ultimate realm of reality where all of us come from and all of us go back to. And I think that Jesus was alluding to this as it recorded in one of the Gospels, where he says to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." Jesus is considered one of the master teachers. And I believe that that is what he should be labeled as, because he took some very powerful truths and he was able to size them down in a way that they are digestible in a sense in terms of our consciousness. I do believe, and I've studied the works of Bart Ehrman, who is a New Testament scholar at the University of North Carolina, that there are many things that Jesus said that are not written, and there are many things that are ascribed to Jesus that are not his words. Bart Ehrman is a world-renowned New Testament critic, and he's written a book called Misquoting Jesus and Jesus Interrupted, and I've just about finished both of those books. And I read them not because I ascribe to a particular religion per se, but I do encounter people who embrace certain religious beliefs and some very fundamental beliefs. And I try to share things with them to help them understand that it is good to be objective and to be open. I think it was Einstein that said, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So I'm open to receiving new information, widening the circle of my awareness. I believe that our source called God is responsible for and sustains everything in existence. And there's a reason for that. Because I believe that in the absolute realm, and a lot of this that I believe is taught in much more explicit terms by Neil Donald Walsh. I was a student of his this past fall. I went through his mentoring program for 3 months, and it's absolutely amazing human being. But he was saying that this one source, this single entity that's responsible for everything in existence, in the absolute realm from whence all of us come, there is an awareness of who we are, our divine selves. But there is no experience of that in the absolute realm, because we can be aware of and know something and yet not experience it. And I'll give you an example. We can know that we're sexual beings, but we cannot experience being sexual beings until we engage in the act of intercourse. And I purport, or I suggest, that this single entity, who is that is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, in order to experience itself, has individuated, has divided into these gazillion pieces throughout existence, and has created a kind of what we would consider field of opposites, in which to not only know its magnificence, but to experience its magnificence. And here I link the ye are gods to what Jesus said, because we are individuations of that single entity created in the likeness and image. Everything in the universe has that energy in it. Another thing that science tells us is nothing is static, nothing is solid, but that all of everything is in motion. It is energy moving. And it moves at such a high rate of speed, it's almost like a bicycle wheel. When it is moving at a very high rate of speed, it appears to be solid. But as it slows down, you can see the individual spokes. Even rocks are animated. There's nothing solid. All of it is energy in motion, all of it. And I believe that this energy, the very thing we call life, that what we have labeled as God and projected these humanoid features on, is the source of our very existence, and that in and through everything, this source is experiencing what it is, because we live in the realm of physicality. We live in the realm of relativity. If you think about it, in the absence of that which is not, that which is does not exist. What do you mean, Reverend McKenzie? I mean this. In the absence of short, there is no tall. In the absence of cold, there is no hot. In the absence of big, there is no small. In the absence of wet, there is no dry. Because in this field of opposites, in order to experience being dry, it must be against a field of opposites. And that is why I believe Jesus again says, bless those who curse you. Bless the darkness and curse it not, because it is in encountering the darkness that you can experience being the light. So I don't believe we're here to learn anything. I believe we come from the absolute realm with all of the information, all of the knowledge, all of the wisdom that we need. It is a matter of recognizing. We use the word recognize, which means to recognize, to remember who and what we are. And we're here to experience that. And not only are we here to experience that, but I believe that as we go through the process of what we call death, we really transition, because energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It just takes on different forms. And I also believe that as we transform, we go back to the absolute realm and we re-enter this realm. So you say, well, do you believe in reincarnation? Not the kind that's attached to some kind of moral gauge where you come back and you experience karma, but a kind of re-entry that all of us do. And you say, well, how is that possible? Well, one of the things we have to consider, and Einstein again comes into the picture, he said, time is an optical illusion. There really is no such thing as time. We move through a time-space continuum. And it's a matter of distance between objects, not so much time, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And in a very real sense, and it touches on something else that needs a further explanation than what I'm giving here, that everything is happening now. So what we consider the past, the present, and the future is all actually happening now. It's almost as though they're stacked on top of each other in kind of a horizontal fashion. Not, maybe I'm getting this wrong. They're not side by side as much as stacked on top of each other. And we're going through all of these motions and experiences at one time in what Neil Donald Walsh calls the eternal moment of now. And when Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, we could actually think in terms of Jesus having been one of these sentient beings that visited us from somewhere else in the universe. I know that sounds a little scientific-y and cartoonish, but it's not so far-fetched. It's really not so far-fetched, because he often would make statements that, of course, the disciples couldn't grasp. And there are also things that have been attributed to Jesus that scholars are now telling us he never said, and there are things he did say that were excluded, that were not given to us. I'm going to move on because I know I'm running out of time. And there's so much here. There's so much rich information here. But I wanted to share this. I'm convinced now that our source, the first source, the clockmaker, if you would, is not a being at all, but more a force. And that what we see in our existence and physicality is that force physicalized. I believe that what we call God is life physicalized, that everything we see is a kind of individuation, a kind of creation of this one single entity, because we look at things from the micro level, but from a macro perspective. And you know how you put something under a microscope, and from the macro level, it looks like it's one entity, but then you see all these parts of it. There's a Christian concept called the body of Christ, which alludes to what I'm saying here, which relates to rather what I'm saying here, is that everything and all things are some part of this body of this single entity, and that this single entity experiences itself in and through everything that exists. And the purpose for physicality is to experience that. So life is more a process of creation than discovery. It's not about discovering who we are as much as it is about each and every day, each and every single moment of divine creation. We are deciding and declaring and demonstrating who and what we are, the greatest vision of the grandest version we ever had of who we are. Because in doing that, this single entity experiences itself through us. There's a Bible verse, Philippians 13:8, I believe, that says, "It is God that worketh in you both to will and do of his good pleasure," using the idioms of the day, his good pleasure, because I don't believe that our source is male or female. I believe, and I think the major religions agree on this, that the source of our existence is the all in all, that it's neither male nor female, but all of it. It is yin and yang, beginning and end, first and last, alpha and omega, and that it is immeasurable and omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient. It is sentient, and it's more a force or an energy than some separate daddy in the sky amorphous being, because that's what our ancestors thought. And we've been afraid to move away from that. So in a real sense, I believe that the human species is at a place where it must come to terms with its oneness. We are not separate. I think separation is an illusion. We are one because there's only one entity. There's a single entity, and we're singularities of that singularity. And our connectivity is indivisible. We're individuated and we're unique and different, but we're all one. I think Gandhi was alluding to this when he said, they asked him, they said, "Well, what do you believe?" And Gandhi said, "I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, I'm all of it." And I think that master, Gandhi, understood as he came into a deeper state of awareness that we're one, that we're tied together to this single entity. And as I close, I'll say, and I believe this single entity is pure love. And I also believe that everything that's done, even in this realm, even the thing, because we label everything. We put a label on everything because our brains are data collectors, and we need to collect data and label things in order to navigate the physical realm. In the realm of the absolute, where we come from, there is no relativity. There's only all there is. But in this realm, everything is relative. Everything is labeled. If we look at a bird flying through the air, we say, well, that's a bird. That's what we call that. And I believe that's an aspect of divinity. We call it a bird. We look at a river and say, well, that's a river. That's what we call it. But I believe that's an aspect of divinity. We look at this person and say, well, that's a Black person. That's an aspect of divinity. That's a white person. That's an aspect of divinity. All of it is an aspect of divinity. The all in all, as the world's major religions tell us. We're one. But because we believe we're separate, and we've embraced primeval theology around this, the world is at a place where we're now more alienated and separated, at least in our thinking, than we've ever been. And it's a crucial time for us because our existence in this realm, our relative existence, appears to be something that we enjoy. And we can't destroy the essence of who we are, because the essence of who we are is from a larger source. But we can destroy life as we know it on this planet. We can vanquish this kind of experience for ourselves if we don't come to terms with the fact that we're one. And as I used to hear when I grew up, what goes around comes around. And again, we hear Jesus saying, love thy neighbor as thyself, because your neighbor is you. It is you having a different experience. We're one. We're tied together. We're not separate. And we enter this realm to experience who we are. Now, there are outcomes and consequences. That's not punishment and judgment, but outcomes and consequences. But I do believe the universe has laws within it. And when we violate those laws, there are outcomes and consequences for that. But that's not judgment and punishment. That's not heaven or hell or some eternal punishment. I think it was Voltaire who said, those who will embrace absurdities are capable of committing atrocities. And it is an absurd notion, in my estimation, that a God of pure love would vanquish a part of itself to some eternal hell. We can thank um, Catholicism to an extent in Dante's Inferno for the way we've conceptualized that whole notion of hell. But it's an absurdity that, for example, you would do something that this God doesn't like, and you have to appease this God. That again is another primeval perception. And if you don't appease this God, because they connected appeasement to the elements and what would happen in the elements when they didn't realize actually what was happening in the elements was the creative energy that they were bringing together to make it happen. They thought the rainmaker was making it happen when they actually were the ones making it happen, because we're made of a creative energy. And I know though there are those who would say, well, why all the suffering? Why won't God stop the suffering? And I think that the Creator would ask us that very question. Why won't you stop it? You have the creative energy to create the kind of world you want. If this is the kind of world you want, continue to do this. But there are outcomes and consequences. My job is not to do what I've given you the capacity to do. I wrote on Facebook the other day, we have met the Savior, and it is us. Someone else said, we've met the enemy, and it is us. And I say, we've met the Savior, and it is us. We have the creative energy within us that has been given to us in and through this single entity to do anything we want in this realm of physicality. We're one. I think if one takeaway from this, and there are many pieces to it, is that we're one. We're tied together. And I think that if the world would embrace this, we could get rid of these notions, these delusional ideas about something being inferior and superior, and something being better than, or something being even other than. Because if there's only a singularity, a thing cannot be superior to itself. There's only one entity. There's only, as Neil Donald Walsh would say, there's only one person in the room. So when I give to Russ, I'm giving to me. When I give to Jean, I'm giving to me. When I give to Karen, I'm giving to me. When I give to Candy, I'm giving to me, and vice versa. Because if there's only one person in the room and everything goes around, comes around, I'm actually giving to myself, which I think is again why Jesus said, give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And I'm not citing Jesus because I'm pushing some religious agenda, some Christian notion, but because there were simple truths that he taught. And it doesn't matter if he even said them, whether Jesus said them or not. I believe they reflect ultimate reality. When the world embraces the oneness, our world will change overnight, because we realize that whatever I do to another, I'm ultimately doing to myself. That's a different frame of reference. When we recognize that even the atheist has something to embrace, because the atheists, and I think they respond to the kind of primeval concept of some daddy in the sky God, and they reject that. But the question can be asked, do you believe in life? If you believe in life, on the pathway I'm walking, life and God are synonymous. Love and God are synonymous. So you don't have to believe in some amorphous separate being. You believe in life, it's fine. Because I don't think this entity that's responsible for our existence cares what you call it. You can call it Allah, or Bill, or Bob, or Mary, or Sue. Does not matter. It is what it is. I'm open for any further questions. I covered as much as I thought I could within a reasonable framework. There's a whole lot more, but I think you got the gist of at least part of what I was saying. Any statements, observations?
Let's continue this on at the coffee hour. That'll be the perfect time.
We can do that.
Let's do that. Well, I really appreciate your words today, Charles. Thank you very, very much. And we're now going to be singing our next hymn, which is 124, Be That Guide, led by D. Lynch.
lift on high the good you find, help to heal the hurts of life. Be that helper nothing daunts, doubt a friend or taunt a foe. Ever strive for liberty, show the path that life should go. Be that builder trusting God, bitter though the test may be. Through all ages they are right, though they build in agony. Be that teacher faith directs, move beyond the old frontier. Though the frightened fear that faith be tomorrow's pioneer.
Thank you very much, Dee. If we were meeting in person in our sanctuary, we'd be collecting an offering now. We can't do that, but please help UU Tampa with your generous contributions. You may contribute online at www.uutampa.org. Your generosity helps ensure the continuing presence of our liberal religious community in the Tampa Bay area. I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, Reverend Mackenzie and Dee, for your participation in our service. After the service, please stay online on this site and join us for our virtual coffee hour, where we'll be able to talk about the service, about Reverend Mackenzie's talk, and talk to each other and enjoy each other. We close our service and extinguish our chalice with these words by John Morgan. In the end, it won't matter how much we have, but how generously we have given. It won't matter how much we know, but rather how well we live. And it won't matter how much we believe, but how deeply we love. Thank you again for joining us, and please stay online for our coffee hour. Goodbye.